such a huge question, but I also think films are made, the films that are made that you know, are very well funded are done through a financial structure, through a mainstream financial structure. And the mainstream financial structure decides what we see, in a way. What gets seen, what gets distributed, what gets onto your telly. You know, when this film was made, it didn't have a cinema release, actually. They kind of buried it, and it's really hard to get hold of, which is such a shame. I don't know what the story is around that. But it's interesting that it didn't have a cinema release, and you could only see it in festivals, or if you're in America on HBO. And a kind of similar thing happened to Pariah, in a way. And, you know, a lot of times, people who finance things will go, there's no market for this. You know, we can't see the market for this film. Who's going to come and watch a bunch of black women? And also they're dark skinned. And also nobody's in heels and they're not showing their breasts. You know, because that is their view of what sells to a mass audience, a particular kind of representation of black women and a particular kind of representation of femininity, which is corralled in a way. So in prison, ironically, allows a diversity which they can't seem to see beyond in real life. Like, they can't have the studs in real life because now we see studs as criminals, and that was The Wire. The stud character Snoop was a criminal. You know, if you see studs, a lot of times they are criminalized, and that then becomes in our consciousness. Oh, it's a boy. No, it's a drug dealer. Oh, yeah, we can see why she's like that. Do you know what I mean? Highly problematic, but that's because our culture is framed by certain kind of white supremacist patriarchal notion of black womanhood, which has a legacy from slavery. Actually, this is not a coincidence till now. You know, we can't escape it in that way. We can't pretend that film is not influenced by that in some way, or dominant cinema.
Yeah, I mean that leads really quite nicely onto what I was going to say, because if you're talking about decolonizing film, that's part of it. Like, any kind of decol work is visceral. It can be quite violent because of the years of the centuries of what we have internalized. And so, I mean, following on from what Campbell said, I mean, everything you said is so pertinent to how we view, make, read, feel film. But it all lives inside of our history, our present. We cannot step outside of that and say, well, I'm viewing this film from another position. That is impossible. We are all impacted by that history, or her stories. We are all impacted by that. And so I agree, it's a huge question, because then it also becomes a bit layered. Because does it then mean that the queer people make films about queer people? Like the blacks make film about blacks? The whites make film about whites? But it's never framed that way, right?
No.
Right, white people make film, it's film. It's not a white film, it's film. Spike Lee is a black filmmaker. It's that thing.
Yeah, and then I've said Martin Scorsese, the Italian filmmaker, or you know, Coppola, the Italian filmmaker. They never say that. It's always, you're absolutely right. Like everything you said, it's hard to decenter that, but that is so hard to do. And I think even that film was trying to decenter filmmaking in the way in which the narrative was broken. Back to that group discussion, and you know, Cheryl calls her films Dunyamentries, in that they are a bit real. There's a bit of realism in there and a bit of fictionalism in there as well. And I think that's kind of powerful, because for a culture, particularly African diasporic culture in the West, and maybe possibly in colonial Africa, our history is oral, and our history was literally erased. and wiped away. So the fictionalization of stories and is important in a way. Just like the Watermelon Woman was a fictionalization of the past because it's often erased and it's only in our imagination. Did that really happen? I don't know if it did or not. Was she really black? Oh, I can't tell because there's nothing written down. She was erased or she was passing, you know, all those sorts of things. So it's kind of hard to grasp hold of our history sometimes in our stories. And I think there are parallels with queer history. You know, was that person transgender? Like, were they? Or were they gay? You know, because there's no records, or the records are very different to how they would be written now. So.
I guess then, finally, I wanted to ask a similarly really big and possibly irritating question about your reflections on what the film says about the imprisonment of women in general. I spoke a little bit about this at the beginning.
You did.
And of course, it's a majority of women of colour who are in prison. And what your thoughts were, having watched that film.
Okay, I have a lot of thoughts having watched that film again now, and I was like, Orange is the New Black, they stole everything. Then you just think that, watching that film, you saw all, I mean, you know, there are kind of cinematic tropes of prison, but I was like, wow, but it was reversed. Instead of the black person being the star, they made the white person the star. So remember the film started with this blonde woman and she was like, oh, the what do you call that thing? The speculum, we need, you know. In Orange is the New Black, it would have been her story, but in this story, it was a black woman. So everything was reversed, and it was actually more realistic in that there were more black women in the prison than in Orange is the New Black. Because, again, mainstreaming of cinema, if you have too many black bodies, then it's seen as a black thing. But white is always neutral. And, you know, the incarceration of women, the criminalization of women, I really don't know much about it, but one thing I would say is that women get criminalized for much less demeanors than men do.
I said immediately. It's like not over 90% of women are in prison for non-violent offences.
Yeah, for just little things like shoplifting or stealing something from their kids or whatever. It's just really petty stuff, actually, that they get punished for, because women are supposed to be sweet and caring, and men, the level of violence is tolerated more amongst men than amongst women, and the level of criminality amongst men is higher, the tolerance is higher than women. So a lot of women in prison are there for, like, you know, I worked on a documentary as an assistant many years ago, and I was just surprised the women in prison, like, somebody was there for stealing a bottle of Lucozade. I could not believe it.
Yeah, you're like not paying your DV license.
Yeah, just really, what I would consider a minor thing. So it opened my eyes, and then, you know, Angela Davis does a lot of work around the prison industrial complex. And also the prison industrial complex has been compared to the plantation because it's one of the most profitable ways of using black bodies again. And, you know, when I was looking at the film, I was thinking, you know, a lot of plantation stuff came to my head, like the branding, the tattooing, the kind of the power structures. You know, when the warden, when Treasure was cleaning and the warden put his foot on the thing, a lot of slave owners used to do that to slaves, and they wrote it in their diaries. You know, if you read a book called Black Ivory by I think his name is James Welvin, this guy wrote meticulous diaries about having slaves. And, you know, one of the things he wrote, the slave woman came and cleaned the house beautifully, and then I shat on the floor. That was in his diary. So, you know, when I saw that, I just thought, yeah, it is like the plantation system, and we can't pretend otherwise, you know?
Yeah, I mean, prison industrial complexes are just another form of how systematic or systemic oppression works, really, how it operates in that way. And prison abolition has been a discussion, has been within dialogue for many, many years. And I don't think that film is any different in terms of the social commentary it's making about black women incarcerated. And there's one aspect that's about the impact of that family, children, relationships, the dismantling of those relationships. You know, if you look at Treasure, so her mother, Margaret Lee, was in prison before she, you know, so they didn't know each other. And the impact on that, Treasure then decided, I need to see my mother, and then set about a chain of events, and her sole goal was to be with Mother, to, you know, and that meant going through the prison system. You know, it's a bit of a mindfuck to get your head around when you think about it in terms of that narrative. But it's also the way in which that level of incarceration works on your psyche, breaks you down in terms of self. But that isn't an individual thing. In this story it was, but it's a collective thing. It's a collective thing with a mass group of particular people who are black.
Yeah, and I thought it's so interesting at the end when she took on the identity of her oppressor, actually.
It's funny because we was in the toilets talking about this. Me and a group of women was in the toilets, and we were saying, well, you know, is that Brownie, or was it her mother? Because her mother's name was Margaret Brownlee Lee. The Brownie was like a nickname. So one way that it could be read is that Brownie took on Margaret's name after she killed her, and now the cycle begins because now Treasure's taken that on. And that name of itself could represent something. We don't know what it is. And this is my interpretation. But, I mean, you could really go that deep with it, right?
Yeah.
That it is the oppressor, but it's also someone whose life I took, and now I'm taking your identity, and I'm going to now become this person's mother. There was also, for me, there was no duality. There wasn't a antagonist and a protagonist. They weren't clearly defined in that way. You know, everyone kind of moved in and out, different roles.
Yeah, I think Georgina describes it as prison culture as like a soft culture, which I really like that term, like, because like I feel like in the film it really goes a long way to ask questions and explore complexity around so-called opposites, binaries.
Yeah.
Black and white, innocent and guilty, straight and gay, bad mother, good mother, biological family, created family. It just, and I don't think she's pretending like she has all the answers. I think she's just saying, you know, and the idea of the soft culture is that everyone in the prison is kind of moving within all of those things, in and out and round, and I think that's really amazing that film manages to do that, because it's really hard, I think.
I think so.
And I think it's something for us to even think about how we move around in those different spaces, because we are conditioned to be so distinctive. We are conditioned to be so this. I am just this. I'm only this. And so when you go to choosing your family, choosing who is my people, there's a power in that. If I choose you, that's quite powerful. And I think for our communities, we do that all the time. We're choosing each other daily.
Or rejecting.
Absolutely, yeah.